Hello everyone, you're listening to Decomposing with me, Daria Lawson. So today we're continuing a little bit of a past show's theme. We've covered the topic of music reviews on the show before and broke down just how they don't hold much journalistic value. It's not to say that the journalists writing them are not credible, well-informed, or knowledgeable sources, but a brief rundown on the matter is basically that for most media sources or news outlets that produce these sort of music reviews, there's firstly not many, if any, cited qualifications of what it takes to review music from the sources specifically. If there was a basis or standard set by these publications or sites, perhaps using them to reference the perspective would indeed be truthful, at least depending on the knowledge they present. For example, saying that the reviewers have a degree in music, play an instrument, have studio session experience, or have this many years of experience working with musicians that could potentially hold up their arguments. But because there's no stated rules or regulations from these sources, we're left to pretty much assume and conclude that, well, they're just written opinions. And sure, maybe these writers have writing experience or journalistic experience, but that doesn't necessarily make them connected with the arts, experienced with the arts, or hold any higher level of music criticism or even music knowledge than you or me. Oh, and there's nothing wrong with having an opinion, right? I mean, hearing opinions on music can be funny, interesting, agreeable, or disagreeable, and perhaps that's why the majority of us put time into reading these reviews. But an opinion in the journalism world doesn't hold any newsworthy integrity, because it's not factual, and any other sort of story reported with this basis would basically be considered unpublishable. Of course, unless it was stated as an opinion piece. So, basically, any of us could write a music review. But if we were trying to come to any overall conclusion or result on whatever we were critiquing, it would inevitably be entirely disputable. Because, firstly, we don't have any extra qualification to hold our conclusions to a higher pedestal. But mostly because art in general is subjective, meaning there's no basis for right or wrong. Everything is open to interpretation. So, after understanding why music reviews can be denounced as unnewsworthy content, but rather opinion pieces, let's denounce them even more. Okay, I know I sound like I'm hating on music journalists and reviewers and stuff, but I promise that I understand there is a place for them in the opinion column category. I mean, who doesn't love to read scathing critiques every once in a while? Or even see praise where praise seems to be due, not only between writers, but between other artists. Ultimately, it's up to any of us and the artists themselves whether they want to take anything seriously. So something interesting about the music review world is just how overarching the critical side of the reviewing community is compared to the praise given out. I've thought about this quite a bit and tried to understand why it might be. When we're listening to music, why are we so often defensive rather than complimentary? I haven't really come up with an answer, so maybe this is something else for you to think about. The best I have is that maybe music reviewers are just jealous? Maybe they're stuck in their ways and don't like the modernization or innovation in music. I could understand liking a certain type of music when you're younger and being sad to see it go as music continues to progress, but maybe because of this there's genre bias, or another thing is maybe the music journalist has an entirely different lens of a piece's overall creation than the artist or musician does. A musician might know all the behind-the-scenes work that goes into it, when a journalist might not notice or care about the fine details. I don't know. Why do you think music reviews are often through the lens of critical judgment rather than praise? But away from that, just to entertain you and get you to think about the relationship between musician and music journalist, I've looked into some music reviews that were given on albums that are now considered classic or legacy-holding bodies of work. Led Zeppelin burst onto the rock scene in the late 60s with a brand new hard rock sound that contrasted flowery, lovey bands earlier in the decade, with Jimmy Page's signature jam-like guitar soloing, John Bonham's energetic drumming, and Robert Plant's range and vocal style. They've become known for the popularization of stadium rock, inspiring countless following and present-day artists, and have sold over 200 million albums worldwide. John Mendelsohn of popular music publication Rolling Stone magazine reviewed their debut album as, "In their willingness to waste their considerable talent on unworthy material. It would seem that, if they're willing to help fill the void created by the demise of Cream," another 60s band, "they will have to find a producer, editor, and some material worthy of their collective attention." The Beatles. Do I even need to write them a praise-filled intro? Not really, but I'll give it my best shot. Essentially the inventors of the 1960s and music in general. Okay, that's not true, but please indulge my comedy. Their album Abbey Road from 1969 has since been hailed for its methods of recording, innovation amongst their catalog with ambitious orchestral scores, and its illustrious harmonic operatic sound, and spawning the progressive concept of songs seamlessly bleeding into each other on albums. Nick Kahn of the New York Times reviewed the tracks on the album as "nothing special." William Mann of the London Times called the album's best songs minor pleasures in the context of the whole disc, and Life magazine critic Albert Goldman said it wasn't one of the band's great albums. Lastly, Oasis released What's the Story Morning Glory in 1995, their second album which continued the life of Britpop, the birth of their very own genre, which would flood the entire country of Britain in the 90s and leave them a legacy of Beatles-like success. The album was reviewed by David Stubbs of Melody Maker magazine as, "So what's the story? Lots of moments, but too many quarters of an hour in between. Oasis are fallen short of the stars. They sound knackered." So what do we make of this information? I mean, at surface value, of course it's funny to see what these albums have gone on to become, and such a critical perspective on something that went on to become so loved and admired by fans and musicians alike. But is a music journalist wrong for this review? Well, as an opinion, no, not at all. Like I said, everyone is able to have an opinion, so we can't just say, "Isn't it funny how incorrect that journalist was?" But let's think about why these critical reviews may have been left on such legendary compositions. Music is always changing, and all music becomes a tidal wave of progressivism, even if it references the past. It is extremely easy to be critical of things that are progressive, simply because they are progressive. We don't understand them yet. You're either on board or you're not. And in this case, the journalists weren't. Maybe the artists went on to create a whole new wave of music, an entire genre that swept the music world. It's hard to predict if something like that is going to happen. It's easy to look at something unfamiliar and go, well, I don't like this because it's new, because it is unfamiliar, because it's change. I think we all know it's a common humanistic trait to not like change, just because we don't know what to expect, we aren't prepared for it, and this is why we can look at old reviews like this and just contextualize how artists were able to shake up the music world with their innovation. You can't exactly predict or anticipate innovation, can you? Thanks for listening. This has been Decomposing with me, Daria Lawson. Tune back in every other week for more music world mind-bending subjects. And if you're interested in more podcasts or other multimedia content, visit southeastarrow.com/multimedia.